is, the people are angry, people are impatient, with different views. How do you hope to crush that temptation of being the leader of an institution and the leader of a civilization? Because those are two very contrasting forms of leadership.
Of course. Thank you very much, Simba, for this wonderful opportunity. But I just want to correct you that people are angry. People are hopeful, and people are anxious, not angry. They want to see change. They want to see transformation as of yesterday. Zimbabwe has had a very difficult opportunity, in terms of economic opportunities, in terms of political opportunity, the right to vote, to participate freely, to be citizens, and to make a difference. You know that we have over 5 million Zimbabweans in the diaspora. That tells you a story about depreciating and decreasing opportunities for the people. And because of that, they're anxious. They would want to see changes of yesterday. But of course, that change comes very tough and difficult because the expectation is that, no, if we have a political party, an institution, an organization, then yes, we'll be able to then mount a challenge against dictatorship. But it's not as easy as that. We need a cultural shift. We need a radical change in terms of our civilization, the way we look at things, our philosophy of politics. We must know that we don't just want to replace leaders, one with another. We've had for far too long rulers instead of leaders. So we need a paradigm shift so that we begin to say those who are in leadership are people who are in leadership on account of accountability, responsibility, and on account of them having checks and balances, going back to the people, being held to account, whether in opposition or in government. You can't have a constitution that is changed without the people, without a referendum. You can't talk of a constitutional amendment that deals with the definition of power and you don't go back to the people and say it's normal. It's actually criminal to try, it's treason, to try and change a constitution without the people. It's actually unconstitutional, and that is where we are. So yes, we need a civilization more than just an institution.
But I think people want to know when. When do you cross in this timeline? When are you hoping to either cross to the other side or bridge these two realities together?
Well, see, when is always a difficult factor because it's not an individual who makes the determination. Time belongs to God. All we can do, Simba, is to lead and provide the alternative. As we are speaking, we are laying the framework, the foundation, the structures, and the outline of the involvement and platforms for citizens to be active in their destiny in their country. And I have no doubt the enthusiasm is huge, the excitement and the willingness is amazing. You saw the contributions we got and the people who came from different walks of life, professionals, media practitioners, business executives who have ideas about how to build a better country. And their enthusiasm is what we must build on, because the hope of a nation is built on very fundamental issues of trust, confidence, and of course, mutual respect, and that's where we are.
Zimbabwe is a country which should, in fact, be the wealthiest nation in Africa. If you look at the range of assets that our nation has, if you look at the range of mineral deposits, if you look at our wonderful climate, if you look at our rainfall, if you look at the agricultural lands that we have, if you look at the physical infrastructure of our nation, if you look at its tourist potential, not just Victoria Falls, Matopus and Nyanga, if you look at our position within Central and Southern Africa, but most importantly, if you look at the talent of our young people, and I speak this morning as a former Minister of Education, when I look back on that time, and as you know, I'm a lawyer by profession, I didn't know that much about education, but that 5 years as Minister of Education taught me about this unique asset that our nation has in its education system. And as threatened as it has been by underfunding over the decades, it remains one of our principal assets, and it generates our most important asset, and that is young people in our nation who have high levels of literacy, who have high levels of discipline, and who are self-motivated. And when you combine that asset with all the other assets that our nation has, one can see why it is easy to make this argument that our country, in fact, should be the richest nation in Africa. Underpinning all of that is the fact that we only have a population of 15 million. You might say only 15 million. We'll compare that to the population of India or China or even other African countries, and you'll see that we, relatively speaking, have a small population. And so when you get all of those factors combined, this country should be flying. And yet the reality is that 46 years after independence, we haven't reached our potential. We still have unacceptably high levels of unemployment. And you as young people know, I guarantee in this room today, you know that the vast majority of young people in our nation do not necessarily think of Zimbabwe as your future. You are trained to think of South Africa and Britain and elsewhere, because there is a sense of negativity in our nation regarding your future. And it is the exception rather than the rule that young people stay here and start developing businesses here. There is a tiny minority of those who get A-levels and tertiary education who remain. And so the harsh reality of our country is that when you look beyond the political rhetoric, the political propaganda, 46 years into independence, we have political sovereignty, but we do not have economic sovereignty. And because of that, we have to rethink what we're doing fundamentally. We need to look beyond the propaganda, because young people and all of us are besieged with propaganda in our nation. We have a tightly controlled media. There's not a single genuinely independent radio or television station in our nation. And that propaganda machine churns out information that confuses us as we tackle this topic. We are told, for example, that we have low inflation. And yes, in one sense, we have low inflation. We're told that we've got a stable currency, ZiG. And in one sense, it is stable. But if you delve down, if you listen to economists and they talk about our money supply growth just this year since April, if you're studying factors like that, our money supply growth in this nation is 46% at present. Speak to any economist, they will tell you that is a recipe for disaster. Printing electronic money in that way. It's part of the propaganda. We're told that the economy is soaring and that there is investment. But if one goes beyond the propaganda to see the reality, we'll see that the vast majority of that investment is in the extractive sector. It is into platinum mines and gold mining and lithium mining. But we see very few companies that are coming in and building factories. Companies involved in the manufacturing sector. Companies involved in the service sector. In this city, to give you one example of the service sector, the international accounting firm Deloitte has closed in this city. It's no longer represented in this city. That happened in the last 2 years. That, when you have international chartered accountancy firms closing, that is an indication that your formal sector is under threat. Part of the propaganda is this country is going to be a middle-income country by 2030. That's in 4 years' time. How can you have a middle-income country where the informal sector is dominating? The vast majority of people are not involved in the formal sector. They are unemployed in terms of formal sector statistics, and because of that, they're not paying the taxes that the formal sector would normally pay. So what I'm saying is that if we as you rather, I'm not young, if you as young people are going to be serious about your future, you need to look beyond the propaganda. You need to look beyond what any politician says, including me. Right? Including me. You've got the intellect to look at the reality of your environment. You need to see whether these are slogans with substance or without substance. And if they are without substance, you've got to think again. Another reality in our nation is the burgeoning gap between the elite rich and the vast majority of the rest of people. And tied into that is the appalling phenomenon in our nation of a mentality that you can get rich quick. You can get rich quick through the extractive sector, you can get rich quick through corruption. But if you look at the rest of the world, unless you are an innovator, like someone like Elon Musk, and I'm not praising him necessarily, I have my problems with Elon Musk. But the point I'm simply making, unless you are an innovator, a unique innovator, the reality of the rest of the world is that you get rich over decades through hard work and diligence. And you do not get rich quick through lawful means. So, if that's the reality of our nation, let's come back to this. Rethinking economic sovereignty. What does that entail? And I want to leave you with 6 broad issues that we have to confront. Primarily as young people, you've got to confront this. The first deals with the rule of law. And I want to use an example for you to show that I'm not talking about ideology when tackling this. And I want you to consider the following question. Why is it that Apple is invested in China but not in Russia? That's a factual reality. Apple is heavily invested in China. If you've got an iPhone, your iPhone generally is manufactured in China. They do not have any manufacturing facility in Russia. Why is that? It's because of the following. Although China is a de jure and de facto one-party state, there is certainty in their business investment environment in China, which isn't present in Russia. And it comes down fundamentally to this first point of the rule of law. Although China is a one-party state, when it comes to the determination of contractual disputes, the enforcement of contracts, the security of investment, there is predictability and certainty. If Apple has a commercial dispute with a supplier, if Apple has a dispute with the Chinese government, they can go to a court which is predictable, which is not subject to political influence or corruption. And that is why they are invested in China. In Russia, it's just the opposite. If you read the book Freezing Order, or Red Notice, by the investor Bill Browder, I commend it to you. He invested in Russia in the 1990s. and he experienced the Russian regime up front, and he experienced their courts and the administration of justice up front. There is no justice in Russia. Their courts are corrupt. There's no economic certainty for those investing in Russia. The reason I'm laboring this for you is in our nation, often we get diverted on ideological grounds. And what I'm saying is that even though I disagree with the Chinese political system, when it comes to their economy, what underpins the growth of the Chinese economy is this issue. Do we have this in Zimbabwe? Are our courts genuinely independent? Are our courts subject to political influence? Are our courts subject to corruption? And if the answer to that is, unfortunately, they are subject to all these influences, it is fundamental to our future. Doesn't matter what broader policies we have. If there's no rule of law, the only companies who will invest in our country are those that don't worry about the rule of law. And they tend to gravitate towards the extractive sector. The profits, particularly in gold, are so massive now that they don't mind. If the rule of law doesn't prevail, then it means that environmental laws are not going to be observed, which makes mining even easier. But companies that are going to come in and manufacture iPhones or beautiful suits are not going to come into that environment. And you will be left with the extractive sector. So that's number one. The rule of law is critically important. This isn't just a lawyer speaking about this topic. It is fundamental to this question. The second issue is related to the first, and that deals square on with the issue of corruption. Think about how corruption is dealt with in China compared to how corruption is dealt with in Russia. Did you see the story just last week on social media of a senior Chinese official in Zhuang, I forget the name of the city now. It's there. Search it. Sentenced to death in China for having been convicted of corruption. Senior member of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, I don't believe in the death penalty. I'm not advocating the death penalty this morning. I'm simply saying that in China, they take corruption incredibly seriously. Whereas in Russia, Putin and all his ilk are corrupt to the core. Their courts are corrupt. But it impacts. The difference is another reason why Apple is invested, and virtually every large manufacturing company in the world is invested in China, but not in Russia. And the same applies here. Let me come back to this get rich quick and address young people. I'm going to be blunt with you. So many young people are impressed by the fact that you can get a new Toyota Land Cruiser plus 50,000 spending money. We seek to defend those who receive those gifts. We never consider where that money has come from, at what cost to our nation that has been. What contracts have not been fulfilled to generate that money? We never stop to think about whether taxes have been paid on that gross income, because bear in mind that donations are not tax deductible in our nation. Gifts are not tax deductible. They have to come from your post-tax income. We don't stop to do that. The moral fabric of our nation is being destroyed before our very eyes, particularly in the mindset of young people. And we need to understand that if we continue down that road, that corruption road in our country, there is no future for the vast majority of young people. There's a future for the tiny 1% or 2% who get the Land Cruisers. But the vast majority of you will not see a genuine transformation in economic sovereignty for everyone right across the nation. So that's number two, corruption. If we don't understand the cancer that corruption is in our society, we can never rethink truly economic sovereignty and a change in our nation. Number three, the environment. It's tied to the first two in our country. It's very specific to our nation. I'm going to speak as mayor now. We have 6 dams supplying the city. The city is already low on raw water. All of you who lived through the last rainy season experienced the factual situation of that last rainy season. In Bulawayo, we had 900 millimeters of rain. Our average is around about 600 millimeters. Historically, if you look back at the records, our dams should have all spilt. They should have all been 100%. Umzungwani Dam, which is just south of the city, barely managed it to 50%. Why? Because of the massive environmental destruction taking place just 15 to 20 kilometers south of here. I've got photographs of it. Entire mountains just being taken away. The soil being taken and just dumped in river systems. The mining regulations which require mining sites to be rehabilitated, totally disregarded. And that's happening in our catchment areas right across those 6 dams. Environmental destruction on a massive scale. And what I'm seeking to convey to you as young people doesn't actually affect me. I'm 68, right? You are in your 20s and 30s. You need to know that by 2050, this city and other cities in our nation is going to have adequate water supplies. The short-term wealth that is being generated for a tiny few who take that wealth, and most of it goes out of the country to other countries' economies, is not going to benefit you in 2050. You know, that the United Nations Development Program estimates that African cities are going to double in size by 2050. Those are the projections for Africa. So if you take Bulawayo as a city of 700,000, we need to double our water capacity by 2050. We should not be reducing our water capacity as is currently happening. And the bulk of that is due to environmental degradation. And those authorities that are meant to enforce our environmental laws doing that. And so if we are to rethink economic sovereignty, control over the economy for you people over the next decade, 2, 3, 4 decades, we need to be looking very closely at how we are destroying our environment before our very eyes for short-term goals, and how that money is not being used to build clinics and schools, and how that money, when the gold has gone, has been mined, will leave an entire generation of young people with no future. The fourth issue is, and now I'm getting ideological, small government. If we are rethinking economic sovereignty, we need to understand that the future of our nation rests in us creating jobs in the private sector, in factories, young people like you having an environment whereby you can set up your own businesses and grow them rather than in the growth of government. And I want to use another example very close to us here, the ZITF. The ZITF stands for Zimbabwe International Trade Fair. How many of you have been to the trade fair recently? Put up your hands. Have you noticed when you go to the trade fair how many government departments you see exhibited there and how few private companies are exhibited? Am I correct or not? The vast majority of people at our trade fair are government departments or ministries. Government ministries and departments do not trade. They employ civil servants. And it is a reflection of our nation where we have a very large government that often delivers unsatisfactory services and it crowds out the private sector. And so if we are going to rethink our economic sovereignty, we have to rethink the size of central government, and tied into that, we have to rethink about whether the devolution principles referred to in our Constitution are being honored or not. Are they? And my view, and I say that this is an ideological view, is that we have far too large a government in relation to the size of our economy, in relation to people involved in the private sector. And that balance has to change. The fifth issue relates to one word, transparency. It's tied into the second issue of corruption. I'm a Christian by faith. One of my guiding principles is something found in Romans chapter 3. If you read Romans chapter 3, whatever faith you are, there's some truth in there because it says everyone has turned away. Everyone has turned away. No one, David Coltart is not a saint, nor are my children, nor is my wife. If you give David Coltart too much power, unfettered power, I will abuse it. And the history of the world shows that one of the best ways of preventing politicians and any people in positions of power from abusing those positions is through the glare of an independent media that exposes what we're happening. Look at what is going on in Britain at present, if you follow that. You've heard of Nigel Farage. He's this populist, extremely right-wing British politician. Up until recently, people were saying he would probably be Britain's next Prime Minister. The Guardian newspaper, however, has been investigating him and has uncovered that he received a donation of £5 million just before he became an MP. He was meant to declare that prior to becoming an MP. He didn't declare it. But the robust independent press in Britain has revealed that. And it has exposed Farage for what he appears to be. Now, in direct contrast in our nation, we have a constricting space when it comes to transparency. I mentioned earlier, we don't have a single genuinely independent radio or television station 46 years after independence. Our newspapers, as well, are either directly or indirectly censored. Journalists who try to expose corruption end up in prison for weeks. Yeah. And if you're going to rethink economic sovereignty, a critical component in that is transparency and a strong fourth estate. Because a strong fourth estate is a critical component in ensuring that public money is spent in the manner it is meant to be spent. The sixth and final point underpins all of these, and it comes down to our Constitution. The Constitution is the document in any nation which secures all the 5 points I've already mentioned today. And when we worked so hard in 2013 to come up with a constitution, we looked at two critical issues. Do any of you watch Netflix? There is the most amazing Netflix documentary at present, looking at the celebration in America of 250 years of independence. And it's about a 5 or 6 part series. I commend it to you if you've got the time. And it looks at how that American Constitution was developed and the challenges to it. And what comes through so powerfully in that documentary is that there are two critical elements: the balancing of political power and the separating of political power. The balancing of power between judiciary, executive, and legislature, and the separating of those powers so that they don't dominate each other. That was critical to America 250 years ago. It was critical to us in 2013. It is critical to us in 2026. When you get an imbalance in that, when you vest too much power in the executive and you undermine the judiciary and its power, if you render the legislature into a rubber stamping body, you are not going to get the other 5 issues dealt with. And if you don't deal with all 6 of those issues, you are not going to secure economic sovereignty in any nation. These are hard issues. Let me conclude. What I've spoken about this morning are the fundamentals. There are others, but these are the fundamentals which have to be in place in any nation. Zimbabwe is no exception. If you look to other nations, those fundamentals are present even in China with the de facto de jure one-party state. They were certainly present in Singapore. They underpin why Singapore was able to transform its economy from where it was smaller than the Southern Rhodesian economy in the early 1960s to where it is today, one of the most powerful economies. An economy where debt and extraction is not an issue in Singapore. They've got nothing to extract. It's a tiny. And the same in South Korea. Look as young people at where young people are in other nations in the world.